Welcome to Real Therapy Gone Wrong, where film real meets real. We are two sex therapists who point out the difference between Hollywood therapy and real life therapy. This show does not constitute a therapeutic relationship. We are Lindsay Murray and Brandy Sellers. Today's episode is Law and Order SVU, Season 25, Episode 4, Duty to Report. Lindsay is going to recap the episode, and we'll chime in as we go to comment on the therapy and other mental health issues. Take it away, Lindsay.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to go ahead and set the scene of where the episode starts. Kind of like you said a second ago, we're going to talk about the therapy as we go along. So at any point when I'm recapping, you just chime in when you feel you need to, because I will do the same.
Don't worry,
But
I'm
this
ready.
But this episode starts and we see a man riding his bike, and he passes this house and he hears some music coming from the house. And, we assume it's a house party. And he goes in the house. And of course, it is a house party. There's a ton of people in there. And he says that he's looking for someone named Shay. And he says that he's Shay's math tutor. He goes upstairs to find her. And he walks into one of the bedrooms, and we assume that this is Shay in the room. And she's laying on the bed. She's alone. She's looking upset. And she has a hand over her face, and they look at each other. And just that look, when they're looking at each other, you assume it's Shay because it's clear that he knows her. Then it moves on to a scene where Captain Olivia Benson, played by none other than Mariska Hargitay, she is in therapy. And her therapist is named Dr. Heather Lentz, who is played by Trisha Paluccio. And the therapist is asking her to go back to the moment when she saw Maddie Flynn. And Maddie Flynn, it goes to a flashback to Maddie Flynn. And Maddie Flynn is a girl who Olivia saw being kidnapped in the past. And so you can kind of get like a little flashback there. When the therapist is asking Olivia this, she is doing EMDR and she's doing like this hand movement like this. And at this point, Brandy, I'm going to let you talk about how weirdly EMDR was being portrayed in this
Totally.
moment.
So this episode is actually where the idea for this podcast was birthed because I am watching this episode and so incensed that on a show like SVU that is amazing and I've watched all 25 seasons doesn't have a consultant for EMDR obviously doing the scene.
Very
And
weird.
so EMDR is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And part of a big component of EMDR is bilateral stimulation, which is just a fancy word for going from one side of your body to another side. So when she's doing her fingers, she's doing them like a metronome as opposed to just back and forth. And she's also talking, like the therapist is talking the whole time. And so I thought it would be interesting to just give everybody, because people talk about EMDR all the time, like just a little primer on what EMDR is and how it works. So I mean, you can get a whole huge book about EMDR and there's tons of research about EMDR. So I'm just going to give the basics. And it's basically a process where you help the client who has some kind of trauma from the past go into that trauma and reprocess it, get desensitized from it and reprocess it. So they remember that something happens, but they don't have the charge of that incident. So like you could remember that this bad thing happened without having these like body sensations or belief about yourself related to that incident. And it was sort of discovered by this woman named Francine Shapiro in like 1987. And she was actually walking in the woods and her eyes were going back and forth. And she noticed that she was feeling better. And so then she began to research why that was. And that's how EMDR was born.
And
And
real quick, do you mind
yeah,
sharing what EMDR stands for anyone who's
yeah,
maybe never heard of that?
no, it's eye movement desensitization and reprocessing.
Okay.
So the desensitization part is taking the charge out. And the reprocessing part is like when you have a negative thing happen to you, you have a negative belief about yourself, which could be as simple as like, I'm not safe. That's a
Mm,
negative belief about yourself. It could also be, I'm stupid, or I deserve to be miserable, or it's actually a pretty depressing list that I that to think
Yeah.
about what is the negative thing you believe about yourself. But if you think as a listener today about something negative that happened in your life, there's that still feels real to you and like in the moment, there is something negative that you believe about yourself. And so the reprocessing part of EMDR is changing that from a negative thing to a positive thing that you believe about yourself, which often is like, I did my best,
Mm.
or I can trust people, or something like that. And so this process is actually, I mean, the steps are very delineated, and there's a worksheet that basically you go through for EMDR. But the thing in the episode that she did that was really annoying, the main part when the client is doing the desensitization part with the bilateral
Mhm.
stimulation, the counselor is quiet.
Yeah.
Like there isn't a lot of talking during EMDR. The client's brain is just doing what the client's brain needs to do to heal. And then the counselor will say, pause, take a deep breath, tell me what you notice. Which tell me what you notice is even like an EMDR joke among counselors because I mean, I might say that like 40 times in one session if we're doing EMDR. And then after the client says like I notice I'm in pain or I'm sad or whatever the thing is, then the counselor says notice that, and then the bilaterals keep going. So the counselor doesn't really interject a lot into the situation. It's
Mhm.
mostly the client's brain healing itself with the counselor's help.
Well, and that's I mean, the annoyance of the counselor talking in this episode as she's doing the hand movement, which you like you said, it is a metronome. It's supposed to be just back and forth, but it's even shown like how annoying that is because Olivia says, I can't process. And then the therapist says, which I was like, ew, she goes, you can't process or you won't. And I was like,
Right.
that is so aggressive to someone who's like going through a trauma. So I kind of chuckled in that moment, but that did show you can't it's not really gonna work if the therapist is talking through the whole time.
Right. And it's also not going to work if the client isn't ready. Like
Mhm.
that Olivia is saying that she can't could A be because of the metronome and feeling seasick, but also it could be that she's not ready. And that's part of the EMDR process is assessing, is this client ready? Like, do
Mhm.
they have what we would call the window of tolerance? Do they have enough room in their window of tolerance to be able to process through this event? And if not, then more resourcing needs to happen before someone could do EMDR.
Yeah. What does the resourcing look like? Because I'm not trained in EMDR, but I've been a client who's gone through EMDR, but it was several years ago. And it's so hard for me to even remember what it was like going through it.
Yeah. So resourcing is could be what else is going on in the client's life. Like,
Mm.
do they have at least one stable relationship? If this client has a prescription for medications, are they taking their medications how they are prescribed? Is this client eating at least 2 meals a day? Like I call it chop wood, carry water with my clients. Like, is this client able to do the bare minimum things that
Mm.
are required for just being a human? And if not, then that's what we work on.
Yeah.
So that's part of the resourcing. Sometimes resourcing can look like peeling out part of this EMDR process and only having the client talk about positive memories for a while, because you can build the positive feelings of those things and that can help a client be resourced. So it kind of depends
Mhm.
on what's going on with the client, but that's part of EMDR training is for us to learn about readiness. And EMDR training is, I mean, it's 6 full days, and like the one I did was 3 days, and then a month later 3 days, and then it's also a certain amount of supervision. So you do EMDR with your clients, and then you consult with a counselor who has already been trained in EMDR to say like, am I on the right track, and to get tips and Just make sure that you're doing it correctly. So it's
Okay.
not like one of these 2-hour fly by night processes to get EMDR trained.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a huge fan of EMDR. Like everything you're describing makes so much sense. And it is very shocking they wouldn't have had some kind of consultant for the show. I'm thinking like, why not? Where did they it just makes me wonder that they all just Google EMDR and this actress was like, I can act that out right now. And they just rolled with it. It's very odd.
Seriously. A couple more things I do want to tell people is that it is one of the main trauma modalities that's used at the
Mm,
VA. So it's not like a fly by night thing. Like it is a very well researched and well respected modality. And I've been a client that has done EMDR. I do it with
mhm.
clients, and it can be really helpful for a lot of traumatic things. And if people want more information about EMDR, they can go to emdr.com. And there's also emdria.org, which is EMDRIA, which is just like the certifying organization, basically.
Okay, great.
All right.
Well, so getting back to the scene where Olivia is unable to process and then the therapist aggressively is like, can or won't. By the way, I would never say that to a client. If a client ever said to
Same.
me, I can't do that, I would never assume they just don't want to do it. That's not what I would do at all. Because very shaming, because it feels like, well, I guess it's my fault that I'm not ready for this. So not good
Well,
enough.
I think also we're taught to meet clients where they are. And
Yes.
sometimes we do have to do gentle confrontations, but not like that. Like if someone isn't ready to open a door, okay, then we don't open it today.
Yeah, if I felt like someone was ready but hesitant, I can inquire about the hesitancy, right? There's a way to do that that is not shaming, that is just very, hey, what is happening for you as we even imagine doing this? What comes up for you? I mean, even that is a very a gentle confrontation of, if you're ready, but it's really scary to do, let's just kind of talk about the scariness of it, rather than you're just choosing not to do this thing because um, I just feel like clients really don't do that. It's not like this thing can help me, but I refuse.
Right.
There's usually a lot more underneath the surface that we want to inquire about in a way that makes them feel heard and that that's okay, that that's just where they are. So the scene goes through that, and then the therapist mentions vicarious trauma, which I'll be honest, I had never heard the term vicarious trauma until this episode. Which vicarious trauma is kind of just the concept of like working with trauma clients can in and of itself be traumatic. It can negatively impact you, whether you're like a helper, therapist, social worker, police officer, I mean, captain, all those things. So the therapist is just pointing out that Olivia might have vicarious trauma and she probably knows what that is. And then Olivia starts naming off victims, and the therapist asked her what makes Maddie Flynn different, because that's kind of where I guess the hangup is. And Olivia says Maddie's different because she doesn't know what happened to her. So if in previous episodes, I guess Maddie was taken and she couldn't really solve the case. And she says that the therapist says something like Olivia says she's had question marks in her career. And the therapist asks, have you ever had any question marks in your life? And the therapist points out the necklace she's wearing, which is a compass. And Olivia says, yeah, this compass necklace was given to me by an interesting friend. And of course, that friend is Detective Elliot Stabler, who is not in this episode, but a lot of SVU fans know who that is. And he's played by Christopher Maloney. So we know that's the friend that gave it to her. Um, and then the therapist points to the necklace and is like, what are you hoping to navigate? And then the alarm for this end of the session comes, and then it's kind of like, we'll pick up here next week or whatever. I thought it was a very TV therapist to like point to a necklace and be like, that's a compass. What are you hoping to navigate?
It totally was. That would never happen in session. Also,
No.
the fact that she had that alarm and that it was such an annoying alarm, I don't have an alarm to end my session.
No, it was so loud and like startling. I mean, even as a viewer, and if, yeah, for anyone listening, I don't have an alarm either. I don't think I know any therapists who do. That's why you have clocks in the room. You're just paying attention to time. And when it comes time, you just let them know, hey, we're coming up on time. We'll pick back up here. Right. So the alarm was like very odd. And then, so they're walking out of the therapist's office, and the therapist stops Olivia on her way out and says she's having an issue with the patient who was found incapacitated with details that sound like sexual assault, and that she's like, this client is struggling. And Olivia tells the therapist that if this client is a minor, that she has a duty to report. And the therapist says, well, I was going to call CPS, but wanted Olivia to talk to this client first. And then the therapist says, oh, but another wrench in the wheel is this girl's father, him. And then it's like this deadpan face of Olivia, like this shocked face, like, who could it be? That whole scene, I had so many like thoughts and feelings because my first note was like, what the fuck?
Right?
Because in real life, that would never happen. I would never, you don't, as a therapist, you don't go to clients and ask them for help with another client. That's extremely weird. And then just the fact that Olivia had to tell her, well, you have to, you're mandated to report, like having to remind the therapist of her job was weird. And then the therapist not calling CPS and then saying, who the girl's father is. I mean, just whoa. There's a whole
Yeah.
jumbled mess happening here.
Totally. And it made, there's sort of a joke about doorknob confessions. Like sometimes you could have a session with a client and they don't say anything of like importance the whole session. And then like
Mhm.
literally on the way out the door, they'll be like, oh, by the way, I got sexually assaulted last week, or like drop a bombshell.
Yes.
And this was like the reverse of that because the counselor did it. And
Yeah.
it's so unethical. I mean, like if a client reported this to me that a counselor had done it, I would report that counselor to the board. Like that is
Mhm.
just not an ethical thing that counselors are supposed to do.
100% because it's a breach of confidentiality, but also now the relationship between this therapist and Olivia is super fucking weird. Like the next time you go to session, do you really think you're going to be talking about your own trauma, or are you going to be talking about this girl that you now are working with? I mean, very extremely weird. And also not okay that the therapist didn't report it because she said, like Olivia says, you have duty to report. Well, I was going to report, but I was wanting you to talk to them first. That's also not how you would do that. If it's a minor and there's been a sexual assault, you're mandated to report that. You don't wait for someone, another client, to go and talk to your client before reporting that. And again, it does make you wonder, why was no one consulted on this episode? That's not how that would ever play out in real life.
Yeah. Also, like you said, in the next session, would you come back and be talking about that case? Of course you would. And at that point,
Yeah.
Olivia in New York is probably paying like $300 an hour to go to this
Yes.
therapist. So then Olivia is paying money to go and talk about a work case at her therapy appointment. It's just up and down the board, completely wrong.
Yeah, very odd. So that scene ends with, oh, but the girl's father. And then Olivia has this kind of shocked face. And then in the next scene, Olivia goes to someone's house, and we find out that it's the house of Chief Tommy McGrath, who's the chief over her. I don't really know exactly, but he's the chief and she knows him. And the chief is played by Terry Serpico. And she asked to speak with Shay, who is the chief's daughter. And Shay is played by Grace Colwell. and Shay tells Olivia. So it's a scene where they're at the like kitchen table, and it's just Olivia and Shay. And Shay says or questions like, my therapist told you what I said in private. And Olivia says, you're 15. She's worried about you, and so am I. Um, I'm totally with Shay here. I don't care how old you are. I don't want, if I'm 15, I'm going to my therapist. I'm probably afraid you're going to even like tell my parents, let alone some outside person who is not in my family. Like, like Olivia's justification, like, well, you're 15. I don't agree with that. I think Shay had every right to be upset that this
Well,
was
and
not
also
kept private.
Also, if you did do it through CPS, then it's not somebody that your family knows. Like, this is
Yes.
where this episode is muddy also in this area,
Yeah.
that you don't want somebody who works for your dad to come talk to you about getting raped because your therapist told, like,
Yes,
it's not a soap opera.
because Olivia and the chief talk, and it's just a further level of like the lack of privacy. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right. Even if you're reporting through the proper channels, a neutral party from CPS coming to your house is very different than Captain Olivia Benson showing up at your house, who you know personally
Right.
and that your parents know. So, um, they go through that exchange, and Shay says that she was afraid to tell her parents because then they'll know she threw a party there. And Shay says she doesn't remember much. Olivia asks for what she does remember. And she describes being in her room on the bed, and someone walked in and they started kissing. And she wasn't in the mood, but she feels like she hurt this person's pride. And then he unzipped his pants, and it happened from there. She says that she told this person, like, I need a pause. I don't want to move any forward. But then she says here, he already had a hard on, so she went along with it. And she says she doesn't remember the boy's name, but eventually says it was Sagar, who is her math tutor. So that's like the guy we saw in the beginning on the bike. That's who she's saying it was. And Sagar, the math tutor, is played by Krishna Judnath. Um, but we know from the earlier scene, it doesn't look like he's the one who assaulted her. It very much was depicted as like he saw her after this happens. So Olivia starts walking out to take Shay to the ER and says that she cannot tell the parents. So the chief and his wife's name is Katie McGrath, played by Amy Carlson. The chief and Katie are upset. And Olivia says this is an active investigation. I can't break Shay's trust. And then Katie eventually says, let's let Captain Benson do her job. And they start to leave. But then Chief Tommy McGrath, he says, well, I'm going with you to the ER. And then Olivia tries to tell him, if you go, you're going to lose. Yeah, I will lose Shay's trust if you go. I have a question for you, Brandy. This scene was very confusing as well, because it's like there is a huge lack of privacy and confidentiality, but now that they're going to go to the ER, it's like the parents can't know. That was really confusing to me, because I was like, but she's a minor and you already know. And
Right.
so why can't the parents know? That was like very, very odd to me. But what did you think of that?
Well, I thought it was interesting because it's sort of like at this point in the episode, we flip to actually being ethical in the way that we should be, right?
You're right. I was like,
Like,
what?
she did deserve to have privacy,
Yeah.
and I liked how Olivia handled that.
Mhm.
And I think, as this episode goes on, she shows how trauma informed she is. Like, the way that she was speaking, even when she was interviewing the chief's daughter, was in a very kind, gentle, trauma informed way.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think she does deserve privacy, and that is how the law is set up for young women who are assaulted or young men who are assaulted. Like, they get to have privacy around that.
Okay, good. I'm glad. It was kind of a refresher for me of, well, what is the law around that? Because I don't work with minors. I don't really have a lot of experience with minors. And so it did just make me think, with my therapist hat on, yeah, what are the rules around that? Like, how much do parents have to know? And is it okay to keep the privacy? And I think I agree with you. I think that it was good. It's a shame at how it came to be, though, that it started with the break of confidentiality, no privacy at all, but now we're going to go back to privacy. And then her parents are kind of like, what the hell is happening here? So the next scene is at the hospital. It doesn't look like the chief went, but the mom, Katie, went because um, it's Olivia and Katie talking, and Olivia tells her, "Hey, Shay says that she wants privacy." And the mom asks if she was raped at the party. And so this is kind of our clue in that they already knew that there was a party because Shay did not do a good job of cleaning up after the party when they got back home. The mom says that Shay and Chief Tommy are both hard headed and that Tommy has been hard on her. And Olivia asked, which I thought this was a great question, how has Shay's behavior been the past few days or week or however long it's been? Like, how has she been acting and feeling? And Katie says that Shay's been upbeat, but could tell something was bothering her. But she assumed the what was bothering her was feeling guilty over throwing a party. She didn't know that it was this, and just that she stopped asking Shay about her life a long time ago, and then Katie states that they have security cameras around the house, but then like it kind of switches over to the recordings on the security cameras, and you can see Shay putting stickers over the cameras. So you couldn't really
Smiley face
see.
stickers.
Yeah, smiley face stickers. So they're not going to really get any footage there. And then in the next scene, it's Olivia, it's Finn Tutuola, who's played by Ice-T, and then Detective Terry Bruno, who's played by Kevin Kane. And so they state that the case technically belongs to Brooklyn SVU, according to Chief McGrath, and that they really don't want to piss him off. And then there's this whole bit where Olivia's telling Finn, "Isn't it a bit late for you to be worried about pissing off McGrath?" So we're assuming there's some negative history there. And he just says that he has a pension to worry about. So he's worried about getting paid. He's like, I don't want to make him mad. So they bring in the math tutor, Cigar, and they interrogate him. And he says that he was there to tutor, and maybe that Shay forgot to cancel tutoring due to having the party. And then we find out this was a sophomore party and he's a senior. So he's 18 and Shay's 15. And he just tells them he went into her room, saw her very upset, saw her skirt pulled up, and says that she yelled at him to leave and he left on his bike at 10 p.m. Well, Chief McGrath comes. He's pissed. He's heard that that it's like, oh shit, it's the math tutor. And he goes in there and is really verbatim says to Cigar, he goes, "If I find out you did this, I'll kill you." And so Olivia kicks him out of the squad room and she starts to leave, saying that she's going to go to IAB, which is International Affairs Bureau. So at this point, there's a lot of tension around like who really did this and Chief McGrath being out of line. I thought I thought Olivia handled that really well too. Of
I thought so too. She
Yeah.
was really holding the boundary of the
Mhm.
squad room. And also, I think IAB is Internal Affairs Bureau.
Oh, what did I say?
International.
Oh, it is internal. Good Lord. I have internal written here too, and I still said international. Yeah, you're right. Internal Affairs Bureau. So in IAB, Olivia walks in and she talks to Captain Renee Curry, who's played by Amy Donna Kelly, and brings her a coffee. And there's kind of a joke of like, "You're bringing a coffee to bribe me," or something like that. Um, and so they go into Captain Curry's office and talk about the misconduct allegations against the chief that Olivia wants to report. And basically, when Captain Curry hears what happened, that he directly threatened a suspect, she now wants herself or IAB involved in every interview now on this case. And also that DNA processing should happen at the DA's office to avoid any bias. And so they kind of walk through, which again, I thought was really nice to see. Like they know that the chief is personally involved in this case and they're going to do what they need to do to avoid the bias that, well, essentially is already there.
Right.
Mhm.
Also, The IAB agent places the coffee on her desk, like just so, and Olivia notices it. And the IAB agent says everything has a place. And it was a little like maybe a hint that this character has OCD or struggles with compulsions to
Yeah.
make things be a certain way. So that was the mental health thing that they hinted at in this episode.
Yeah, and it kind of comes up a little bit later. You know what I'm talking about. I'll mention it. But yeah, that's an observation that does matter in the future. So in the next scene, it's Cigar, his lawyer, and Detective Terry Bruno. And Cigar's parents said he didn't get home until midnight. And so he clarifies, well, I did leave at 10 p.m. on my bike, but I had a date with someone named Claire Oswald in his AP Chem class. And then he says he went to her house to study for an exam. And they're like, well, I thought you said it was a date. And he says that was a date to him. And so they ask him why he lied. And he said it's hard enough for him to get girls, even more so with the police painting him as a perv. But then you find out his alibi checked out and his DNA didn't match. So he's off the hook. It's, I'm, it's interesting to me because they're kind of, I think they're trying to set up a little bit of confusion on like, is this 18-year-old kid like really a pervert? And he's not telling the whole story. We do find out it wasn't him who committed the assault. But I just found that to be an interesting scene with like, well, I went on a date and the date was us studying for AP Chem.
You end up feeling really sorry for him. Like he's a nerdy math tutor kid. He can't get a
Yes.
date.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So moving forward to the next scene, they're all in Olivia's office. It's Olivia, it's Sergeant Tutuola, it's Detective Bruno, and Captain Curry from the IAB. And they point out that the math tutor only told the half truth. And then Curry asks, well, what if Shay did the same? And Olivia takes offense to that and says something along the lines of like, she's like, the kid is not a desk. Everything doesn't have to be in its place.
Right.
Just really insinuating. I thought it was smart because it does speak to the fact that trauma victims don't need to have this clear cut, every detail checks out story because that's not how trauma works.
Totally. And that's such a great point. And I think we make a lot of assumptions, or I hear on TV shows and podcasts, well, the victim acted XYZ. And that's not how you would expect a victim to act. Therefore, the victim isn't telling the truth. And
Mhm.
that just is so inaccurate on so many levels. And especially, this person is 15 and have been drinking. And it makes sense to me that there would be a lot of reasons why she can't give a really accurate narrative of what happened to her, like from the jump.
Yeah, absolutely. She's 15. She's young. She's also scared, didn't want her parents to know she had a party. There was alcohol involved. You probably don't remember all the details. It is a bit fuzzy. So I just kind of like you were saying earlier, Olivia is very trauma informed, 100%. I mean, you get a lot of really good insight from her character. So moving forward, we see Katie, who is Shay's mom, comes in to meet with Olivia, and Captain Curry from the IAB is there, and she's caught off guard. It's kind of like Katie's clue in that IAB is involved, right? Like there was a report against her husband's behavior, and she is just saying that Shay lied about covering up the security cameras and says something like, good luck finding the truth. And then Curry says, and this was such an odd scene for me, but Curry says, she's telling this to Olivia and Katie. She says, the prefrontal cortex is one of the last parts of the brain to mature, and it's the area responsible for planning, prioritizing, and making good decisions. And they're kind of looking at her like, what the fuck was the point of that? And I think what she's trying to say is that it's not entirely Shay's fault, but the way she goes on that little mini tangent was odd.
It almost made me think that they did do a little bit of research about EMDR
Yeah.
because part of how what EMDR does is it helps your prefrontal cortex does develop last.
Mm-hmm.
And some studies even show for men into their 30s before it's fully developed. And that's the part that helps with executive functioning. It helps with like understanding ramifications to your actions, but it
Mm-hmm.
also is the organized filing system of our brains.
Yeah.
And so, if we are not in the middle of being traumatized, then information just goes to your prefrontal cortex and gets filed away, and it's fine. But if your amygdala, which is this tiny structure in the middle of your brain, senses that there's some sort of danger, then your prefrontal cortex isn't even online. Because if a bear is chasing you, you don't have to think like, well, how did that bear get here? What does that bear want? Like you have to run
Yeah.
away or play dead or, you know, fight, flight, flee, fawn.
Yeah.
Um, and so the problem is then that those things never get filed away. That's why traumas can feel so present in the moment, even though it happened 15 years ago or 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And so what EMDR does is it helps shift the bad thing that happened into your prefrontal cortex so you can file it away. So the fact that they even talk about prefrontal cortex in this episode um, kind of I made me think maybe they did study a little bit about EMDR and they're kind of bringing it back around in that way. But
Yeah. It was a weird way to tie it in. I mean, I'm glad that they did because it just gives you kind of that really scientific context to it. But it was the timing of it was so weird. I just laughed because it's like they Googled what the prefrontal cortex does and kind of slapped it in the middle of the script, you know?
totally,
Um, but yeah, again, kind of like insinuating it's not entirely Shay's fault. And then, that Katie initially doesn't want IB involved. Like she doesn't want Shay talking to Captain Curry from IB, but then finally agrees. So then it goes on to now they're at the table. It's Olivia, it's Captain Curry, it's Shay and her mom Katie. And here is where you find out that like they inform them it wasn't your math tutor, the DNA doesn't match, his alibi adds up. And so Katie starts insinuating who the boy really was by saying, our families live across the street, and it's a kid whose dad is close friends with my dad, and her dad being Chief Tommy. And so then who they're talking about. And so who they're talking about is Liam Dowling, who is the boy across the street. And Liam is played by Cameron Mann. And so Olivia Benson and Curry, they go to Liam's house and his parents are really upset about the allegation and really doubting it. And they said they knew about the party. They the father says that kids were drinking seltzer that was stolen from his basement, which I thought was like a funny like thing to add in there. But the father's name is Mickey Dowling, who's played by Max Casella, and he says, I'm calling Tommy. And so he calls Tommy, leaves him a voicemail, asks him to call him back. And Liam agrees to go to the station and to talk to them, but his parents come with. So his mom and dad come with him, and he's also 15, just by the way. Him and Shay are both 15. As they're walking out to get in the car to go to the station, Chief Tommy McGrath comes across the street. It's really tense at this point. And he's also upset that Olivia brought Curry because he's like, what is she doing here? He definitely knows IAB is involved now. And then Finn Tutuola is also there, and he asks Olivia if she's upset that she took the case yet, and she says, no, I'm not. So that's when you know she's glad that she took it. So at the station, Finn is talking to Mickey and Liam, and he asks if he wants a lawyer, and he says, no, for what? And then it quickly goes to Olivia talking to Assistant DA Sonny Carisi, who's played by Peter Scanavino. And she tells DA Carisi that Shay was examined at the hospital. They searched her room and they asked Liam, is there anything that you want to tell us? And so now we're back kind of in the interrogation room. And he just says we were both drinking. He's hesitant to speak up. Mickey tells him, "You know how I raised you. Don't lie to the cops. Tell them the truth." And Liam says, "Well, we had sex. Shay wanted it and was afraid her dad would find out." And then Mickey says to his son, "You did nothing wrong." So moving forward, now we're back in Olivia's office and it's Olivia, Carisi, and Curry. And Olivia says, "Well, that's not exactly a confession. Either Shay lied or she didn't consent. Like sex happened, but she didn't consent." And Curry brings up the DNA because I guess the DNA did match to Liam. And Olivia says, "Well, he didn't deny having sex." And so Carisi says, "I want to get statements from other kids at the party, as well as any pictures, selfies, videos, whatever, right, that we can get." So now we go forward to it's some shop. I don't know what kind of shop this is, but a teenager works there. And Finn and Bruno are asking him about the party and if he saw anyone with Shay. And he goes, "Yeah, I saw Liam dallying with Shay, but they were all over each other and they went into Shay's room where she closed the door." There, it just kind of goes to another scene where there's like more students that they're interviewing. And there's another classmate, a girl this time, who says that Shay was wasted, but that they did go into her room, but that Liam was being all bro when he walked downstairs from Shay's room after all of that. And so Finn asks, like, what does that mean, being all bro? And she says that Liam was fist bumping with his friends, and she has a photo of it on her phone. So she sends it to Detective Bruno, and then Bruno kind of like zooms in and you can see the math tutor in the photo in the background, like coming into the party with his helmet with the camera attached. So it's like another, why
Dun,
did he not
dun.
tell? Yeah, dun dun dun. Like, what does this mean? And and they're wondering, why didn't he tell them he had a camera on his helmet as he walked into this party? And like you said earlier, he really is like the nerdy math tutor kid, and I think he just really wasn't thinking. Okay, so they take the camera from him, and they're again questioning why he would leave that part out. So anyways, now we go forward to a laptop and they're watching the footage from his helmet camera, and you see that when he's walking downstairs, when Cigar, the math tutor, is walking downstairs, he's walking behind Shay. And then another girl comes up to Shay to console her. Like she can tell Shay's not okay. And you can't hear what they're saying, but she's there to console her. And in the episode, they've been looking for an outcry witness, I believe is what they call it. So someone who
Yeah.
can corroborate the story that something has happened, even if the person can't remember. So that
I
was
think
like a
we should
huge deal.
I think we should mention that this is part of the problem with sexual assault cases.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes it does come down to it's a he said, she said situation.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why a lot of times women don't report sexual assaults to the police because if it's he said, she said, and then they're gonna like dig into these people's lives
Mm-hmm.
and try to find somebody else who can corroborate the story. It's just it becomes a whole thing as opposed to this person was victimized. On the other hand, there are rare but some cases of people who make false claims.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think like these cases are really nuanced and I think this episode showed that really well about them looking for this outcry witness.
Mm-hmm.
Just how complex it is.
Very complex. It's hard to be believed. Like it is very easy. Even Liam in this episode, all he has to say is, "Well, she did want to have sex with me. So that's why my DNA is there." And it's really hard to disprove that, unfortunately. And we
Right.
see that here. So the outcry witness is very important and they want to talk to her. And they at the next scene they are sitting with Shay. It's Shay, her mom, Curry, and Olivia, and she doesn't know who this other girl was. So that's difficult because they're hoping she'll know, but she doesn't. And they tell her that Liam had a different story than what she said, and she denies that. And a part that I really loved here is Olivia reminds Shay that if she wanted to have sex and changed her mind, that that's okay. And that is the open door where she starts telling more about what happened in her room. I love that part because I know if at any point you wanted to have sex, it can feel like, well, now they have full access to my body and I really can't say anything about, like, was I really victimized here? And the answer is yes, because you can change that answer at any time. And it just seems like Shay didn't know that because of course she didn't. She's 15, she's young, and having someone like Olivia tell her that seemed to really make her open up.
Totally, and I recently saw this clip of parents who were incensed that the school district wanted to teach their kids about consent. And I know in Texas, for example, they recently redid the sex ed curriculum and they didn't include consent because some people felt like it was too controversial. And it's so important that we learn about consent, that we teach kids about consent, because if, for example, Shay had known, like, you can withdraw consent at any time, then this might have been a different story. And people need to know, if you say yes to kissing, you're not saying yes to fucking. And you can say
Yeah.
yes to fucking and then 60 seconds later be like, actually, no. And you have the right to do that. And so consent is something that happens, that needs to be happening and questioned through a whole sexual experience with someone. It's also, there's that tea video. Have you ever seen that about consent and tea?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Like, just because you want tea on Sunday doesn't mean you want tea on Wednesday. And if someone passes out, don't give them tea. And it's really cute. Listeners can Google it. But
Yeah.
that,
And I just heard this really great I guess analogy or way to teach consent. Like I think unfortunately when we say consent, I think people's minds just go to like we're teaching kids how to have sex. And I'm like,
right.
"Whoa, slow down a second. Consent really starts at a very young age and the analogy I just heard earlier today is that we do teach our kids consent at every age. Like if we're going to our neighbor's house, we don't just walk into their house unannounced. We wait to be invited. We knock on the door. We see if they're okay with us coming in. And then, even when we do that, we don't just go in every room in the house. They may only want us in the living room, right? They may only allow us in the kitchen. And just like you can withdraw consent, let's say you go in the kitchen and the owner says, actually, I don't want anyone in the kitchen. I want to go back. We need to go back to the living room. I mean, you can teach it that way in like very age appropriate ways. But to remove consent altogether from a curriculum makes absolutely no sense because then you have no knowledge to translate it to a sexual context. It's just so unfortunate that they would remove that. They would not
Well, they
even include
actually
it.
didn't remove it.
Yeah.
There, it wasn't ever in there, and people
Yeah.
wanted to include it, and
And
they
they said no.
did.
So they didn't
Yeah.
even, it wasn't even a removal. It was like, it was never there. We're not going to add it.
Right. There is a board book called C is for Consent that's for babies, and it's more as like you don't have to hug grandma if you don't want to hug grandma, or it's
Hmm.
about consenting to like what you want done with your body, or whether you want to shake hands or
Hmm.
engage with somebody else's body, which has no, like, the book has nothing to do with sex.
Yeah.
So um I in that scene, I really felt bad for Shay because it was clear that she didn't understand that you can consent to kissing, and that doesn't mean that you consent to fucking, or that you can withdraw your consent anytime.
Yeah. And she goes on to explain so after Olivia says that, she does say, I just wanted to make out. And he took her shirt off and it felt good. But, as soon as it felt good, she didn't want to do any more than that. And she said that he pulled her skirt and she told him to stop. And he kept saying, come on, it's no big deal. It's just a little bit. And then he just did it. Um, which is again, it goes back to consent. Like she did consent to kissing. Maybe she enjoyed her shirt being taken off, and that's where she wanted to end it. And Liam, it, I we'll get to it in here in a second on like the issues with Liam and his family, but it's unfortunate that he didn't stop it there because someone's saying like, "Come on, it's no big deal." It's actually a really big deal.
Totally. And that's coercion. right? Like
Yes.
no means no. And the point isn't to just keep asking over and over and over again until you get a yes or until the person is just quiet. We need to be getting enthusiastic consent. Like, hell yes, I want to fuck you. Or if we don't get that, then it's a no. But
Yeah.
and I think an older man told me once, like, that was what they were taught in the 50s or 60s. Like, girls are supposed to say no and put up a fight, otherwise, they're sluts.
Mm.
And boys are supposed to just keep hounding them. And that was sort of how it worked then. And we need to really help people understand that is not how it works.
No, it's not. It's not. We have a long way to go on the education behind this. So Shay expresses all of that. So we know based on her story, it was an assault. And then Katie, her mom, wants to talk to Olivia alone. And it really gets into this exchange about Katie saying, "Hey, I spoke to Tommy, the chief, and he apologized for his behavior. And we want you to call off IAB. And I've been an NYPD wife for 20 years." And then she suddenly is like, "Are you gunning for Tommy's job?" And Olivia is shocked by that allegation, which, hello. I mean, if you've ever watched the show, Olivia's not the type of person to go to IAB to like sneak behind someone's back. Olivia like very much has a lot of integrity, would never do that. And so it just kind of blows up and Katie's upset and is like, Shay's not going to testify and we will not stand for this. So that was really weird. That's how that scene ended. Um and then it shows them with the girl from the video. I guess they finally figured out who that girl was. And the girl said that her and Shay had never met before. She was there at a party with her cousin, and that her and Shay went to the bathroom together. And Shay told her in that moment that Liam raped her. So that's how that was like, that's what they needed to arrest Liam. That's the confirmation they needed. So they go to Liam's house. It's nighttime. Liam is arrested at his home. There's a lot of police cars. And then Mickey, who's Liam's dad, and then Chief Tommy get into an argument on the street. And it's this really heated argument. They're kind of pushing each other. And then Mickey, and people are trying to tear them apart. And Mickey yells out, "Your daughter's a slut." And Tommy pulls a gun out on him. And then Katie begs him to stop. And he does. And he walks away and says, "Sorry." So it's a very, very aggressive scene. Um, and IAB is going to be hearing about this. Let
Right.
me tell you.
Yeah, because you could be the chief of police, but if someone calls your daughter a slut, you're probably still going to want to kick their ass or worse.
Yes. Yeah. So he, I mean, rightfully gets upset. Like it was a fucked up thing for Mickey to yell out. Um, So then we go to the interrogation room with Finn, Detective Bruno, Liam, and his lawyer. And Liam confesses in this scene. And then he says that his dad told him the first time he kissed his mom slapped him. And so you get a clue in of the example that he was given on like what a sexual physical relationship should look like. And then Finn says it's not the 80s anymore. And he pleads guilty.
Such a
And
cringy scene. Ugh, when Finn says
yes.
that, I was like, "Ugh, it is not the 80s." But also still this keeps happening. Like this episode is from this year.
Yeah, it's from 2024. It's just wild. So, um, and let me see. Then Finn says, he says to Olivia, um, "Are you sure you want to report the chief about pulling out the gun?" Um, and I believe she says yes, because again, she wants to do the right thing. Like it should be reported, essentially, is what she's saying. And then they get a domestic dispute call from Brooklyn at the Dowling house, which is Liam's house. And so it's kind of like jumping forward a little bit in the timeline. But when they get to the house for the domestic dispute call, we see Liam's mom, Janice Dowling, who's played by Monica Weish, trying to get in the middle of Liam and his dad. Earlier in the episode, and I forgot to mention this, she said at one point that Mickey, her husband, had broken his wrist, I think maybe falling off of a ladder or something like that. And then it might have been Finn who asked, like, your husband didn't break his wrist falling off of a ladder, did he? And so then you learn that the husband has been abusive, like punching holes in the walls, and she's never told anyone. And I guess the husband had pushed her into glass and it caused her to have 16 stitches. So then it goes to the hospital. And
Yeah,
so,
before they
uh-huh.
leave the house though, the wife says to Olivia, like, I should have told someone. And Olivia says, well, you're telling someone now. But
Yeah.
that was another great example of being trauma informed because
Yes.
she wasn't like shaming the victim. She
Yeah.
was encouraging her, like, you're telling someone now, and that's what's important.
And it's really hard to tell someone. It's really hard. I cannot stress that enough. Like, if anyone listening has ever been a victim of domestic violence, it cannot be overstated how difficult that is to tell anyone, not even just like to report it to an official, but to even like tell a friend or a
Or
family
tell
member.
yourself.
Yeah, or to tell yourself, you kind of justify it and like, this will be okay. So, yeah, Olivia just totally trauma informed. And then we go forward to the hospital where Janice, the mom, is getting her stitches. And Chief McGrath is there talking to Olivia and really talking about his daughter missing when Shay was a kid. And he like walked on water to her and was so looked up to. And Olivia just reminds him to keep loving his daughter no matter what. And he says that he doesn't expect Olivia to cover for him. um, he's ready to take his punishment for his behavior, which I thought was a great moment. It's a very redeeming moment for him of like, I don't expect you to cover for me. I'm gonna be fine because this is what happens, when you misbehave. And then the last scene is Olivia is at a bar, drinking a glass of wine, and Captain Curry from the IB meets her there. And then they just kind of have a discussion about Curry possibly coming to work for the SVU. And that is the end of the episode. And I think Curry does go on to be part of the SVU in future episodes.
Yeah,
So
she
yeah.
does.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Great
Yeah.
job.
Yeah. This was a very interesting one. I think, like we've said multiple times, Olivia is great at her job, obviously. But going back to her therapist in the beginning, yikes.
Yikes. She gets a lot of demerits. Like I
Yes.
really didn't find a lot that was redeeming about her at all. I mean, the actress I'm sure is great, but the the writing for the therapist was really bad. And I don't like to disparage SVU because I love this show, but
Mhm.
yeah, that scene was very bad. Great job summarizing.
Thanks. Yeah, when I saw that scene where the therapist is asking her about another client, I think I even texted you and I was like, "What the hell is happening in this scene?" But
Yeah,
here we are talking about it. I mean, still an overall good episode. The therapy was not great.
well, and I think this episode, not only do we learn about some mental health stuff, but we learned about some sexual health stuff that we need to all
Yes.
be talking about more. So I'm glad we did this episode.
Me too. All right, everyone. If you enjoyed this episode of Real Therapy Gone Wrong, please like, review, subscribe, and follow us where you listen to your podcasts. In our next episode, we will discuss Grey's Anatomy Season 17, Episode 3, titled My Happy Ending, which you can watch on Hulu. And if you watch it ahead of time and then tune into our episode, you'll get to follow right along with us. If you would like Real Therapy Gone Right, we are two actual therapists who help clients on a daily basis. Contact us if you'd like to learn more about our work or want to hire us. You can find me, Lindsay, at relationshipmatterstx.com or Brandy at sellerscounseling.com. Our show email is realtherapygonewrong@gmail.com, and real is spelled REEL. If you're making a movie or TV show and do not want to find your show on our podcast, Lindsay and Brandy are available to consult on your projects. So please get in touch anytime, and we can't wait for you to tune in next time.
Bye.